So if I told you to sit down and, just design the absolute perfect society on paper, you'd probably build something that looks exactly like the Republic of Ireland.
Right. I mean, it is the textbook example.
Yeah, because according to the United Nations 2023 Human Development Index, or the HDI, they are sitting comfortably at number 11 in the entire world.
Out of what, almost 200 countries?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking about a population that's living almost a decade longer than the global average. They've essentially achieved universal higher education, and they are pulling in an astronomical $90,000 a year per capita.
Which is just a staggering figure when you really stop to think about it.
It really is. It looks like a modern utopia. If you try to picture it, it's like this giant triumphant green arrow just pointing straight up.
Yeah, a true model student.
But, and this is why we're here today, keep that image in your head. Because right next to that green arrow is this flashing bright red arrow crashing downward.
Yep. The reality check.
Right. Because when you take that pristine top-tier score and you adjust it for what researchers call planetary pressures, which is basically the ecological bill for all that success, Ireland doesn't just dip a little bit.
No, it's just a free fall.
They plummet 20 places down the global list. 20 places.
It is, honestly, it's a staggering drop. And it really forces us to confront this highly uncomfortable reality about modern economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today we have this fascinating, really comprehensive 15-page analytical report that tracks Ireland's HDI from 1990 all the way to 2023.
Right, 33 years of data.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to figure out whether this prosperity we always praise is, actually real, or if it's just a mirage built on overdrawing our ecological bank account.
And that poses the ultimate question of our era, I think. Are we actually building highly developed model societies, or are we just operating these high-performing tech startups that look incredibly profitable on paper, but only because they're secretly liquidating their own server hardware to pay out the dividends?
Oh, wow. That is a great way to put it. Liquidating the hardware.
Because that is exactly the dynamic we need to figure out today. But before we look at the ecological bill, that 20-spot crash, we first need to understand the height of the pedestal they are falling from.
Right. We have to look at the ascent, the 30-year miracle.
Exactly. Because between 1990 and 2023, the trajectory here is just phenomenal. Ireland's score skyrocketed from 0.776 to a near-perfect 0.949.
To a 949 out of a possible 1.0. That is, that's essentially an A+.
It really is. It's brushing up against the theoretical ceiling of how we currently measure human development.
Wow.
And the speed is what is truly notable here. While the global average was sort of trudging along from 0.60 to 0.756 over those 3 decades,
Ireland just put its foot on the gas.
Completely. They crossed the highly significant 0.800 threshold back in 1999. And then, just 6 years later, they breached the elite 0.990 threshold in 2005.
So wait, you are looking at a complete socioeconomic transformation of a whole nation in less than a generation.
Less than a generation, yeah.
Oh,
it's unprecedented.
And reading through the report, it makes it abundantly clear what the main engine driving this rocket ship was. It's pure, unadulterated economic growth.
The wealth generation is off the charts.
Right. In 2023, Ireland's gross national income, the GNI per capita, reached $90,488.
Which is just massive.
It is, especially when you compare it to the world average, which is just over $20,000. So Ireland is sitting at a massive 4.47 times the global average.
Right, over 4 times the wealth.
But I got to stop right here and push back on this a bit because, I know people living in Dublin. I know people living in rural Galway. And they're absolutely not all making 90 grand a year.
Oh, definitely not.
So is this number real? Or is this like a statistical mirage created by multinational accounting? Because Ireland's economic growth is like strapping a rocket engine to a pot of gold.
That is exactly the crucial caveat to this entire report. You're hitting on the phenomenon that economists often refer to as, leprechaun economics.
Leprechaun economics. I love that term.
Yeah, it was coined after their GDP jumped by 26% in a single year. The $90,488 is mathematically accurate for GNI, sure. But we have to understand how GNI is actually calculated in a highly globalized economy.
Right, because Ireland has famously positioned itself as this European hub for massive multinational technology and pharmaceutical companies.
Exactly. They have highly favorable corporate tax structures. So we are talking about the Googles, the Apples, the Pfizers of the world.
The absolute heavyweights.
Right. And when these massive entities route their global profits, their intellectual property assets, and all their leasing operations through their Irish headquarters, it artificially inflates the gross national income.
Okay. So the wealth is technically passing through the Irish economy on a balance sheet.
Precisely. It pulls their aggregate human development score straight into the stratosphere, but it does not mean that the median Irish worker is taking home a $90,000 paycheck.
So it's a total distortion of local purchasing power.
It is. It inflates the aggregate without necessarily filling the pockets of the average citizen to that same degree.
Which fundamentally alters how we should view that number 11 global ranking, right? I mean, if one of the core pillars holding that score up is essentially an accounting byproduct of global tax strategy.
The perfect society narrative starts to look a little shaky.
Exactly. But to be fair to Ireland, the HDI isn't just about money.
No, it's not.
Even if the GNI is somewhat distorted, a country can't fake its physical reality. So let's pivot to the other two pillars of the index, health and education. Because, well, you can't really offshore a longer life.
That's a great way to frame it. You really can't. And this is where the data becomes deeply human and objectively triumphant.
Yeah, the numbers here are wild.
In 2023, life expectancy at birth in Ireland reached 82.4 years.
82.4.
Yes. And when you compare that to the global average of 73.4 years, you are looking at a society where the statistical baseline grants you a 9-year advantage over the rest of the planet.
Almost a full decade of extra life.
That is huge. It's massive. And the timeline in the report shows this wasn't just inherited, it was built. Since 1990, Irish citizens have added an incredible 7.57 years to their lifespans.
Wow, over 7.5 years added in just a few decades.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is proof that the economic boom, even if it's heavily driven by that multinational corporate presence we just talked about, it did generate massive tax revenues.
And they actively deployed those revenues into public infrastructure.
Exactly. You do not add 7.5 years to a national population's lifespan by accident.
No, you'd need serious structural changes for that.
Right. It requires aggressive, sustained funding in advanced medical systems, public health initiatives, sanitation, neonatal care.
So the corporate wealth might be super concentrated at the top, but the physiological benefits of a high-functioning state have clearly trickled down to the biological level.
That's absolutely right. The health metrics are bulletproof. They are quite literally living longer, healthier lives.
Okay, so they've got the time. But let's look at what they are actually doing with all that extra time. Because the education stats in this report blew my mind.
They are definitely an outlier globally.
Yeah, so we're looking at two things here. Expected years of schooling, which is what a child entering the system today can expect to get, and mean years of schooling, which is what the adult population actually already has.
Right. And the expected years of schooling in Ireland is currently at 19.2 years.
19.2.
Yep. The global average is exactly 13.
Wait, hold on. Almost 20 years of schooling. Assuming you start primary school around, what, age 4 or 5?
That's typical, yeah.
That implies the baseline expectation is that a person remains in the formal education system until they are 24 years old.
Essentially, yes.
Is that actually efficient for a society? Or are we just looking at massive credential inflation here?
Yeah.
I mean, does a booming tech and pharma economy basically force everyone to get a master's degree just to land an entry-level job?
That is a highly debated consequence of the knowledge economy, and it's a very sharp observation.
Because it seems exhausting.
It is. When an economy shifts entirely away from agrarian or manufacturing bases and relies almost exclusively on highly specialized services, tech and biosciences.
A barrier to entry just skyrockets.
Yeah, exactly. A 19.2-year expectation means Ireland has achieved near universal potential for higher education, which is great. But it also reflects a labor market where an undergraduate degree is merely the new high school diploma.
Wow. It's like a self-reinforcing cycle.
It really is. The multinational companies need hyper-specialized workers.
So the state funds massive university expansions.
Which keeps people in classrooms for 2 decades.
And that deep talent pool just attracts more specialized companies. I get it. And the mean years of schooling, the current reality for adults right now, sits at 11.7 years, which is still well above the global average.
Right. So to sum it up, they are rich, they are long-lived, and they are incredibly credentialed.
It sounds like a utopian brochure. Great wealth, long lives, high education. But as we noted with the GNI, aggregate averages are really excellent at hiding structural sins.
They are the ultimate camouflage for inequality.
Right. Because think about it. If Jeff Bezos walks into a pub in Dublin, the average wealth of everyone in that pub instantly skyrockets into the billions.
Uh-huh, mathematically, yes.
But nobody else in the room can suddenly afford a private jet, right? Averages blur the reality on the ground. So when we peel back the aggregate score of 0.949, who in Ireland is actually getting left behind?
To answer that, the data scientists apply a stress test to the index. They create what's called the inequality adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Okay, the IHDI.
Right. Essentially, this takes that beautiful 0.949 score and discounts it based on how unequally the health, education, and income are actually distributed across the population.
And the stress test reveals some cracks, doesn't it?
It does. Ireland faces an overall loss rate of 6.6%. Due to internal inequalities.
Now, compared to a developing nation, 6.6% might sound like a rounding error. But for the 11th most developed country on Earth, that represents hundreds of thousands of people completely locked out of the national success story.
Exactly. And what is truly revealing is the breakdown of that 6.6%. Because it's not evenly spread.
Right, let's look at the breakdown.
The loss due to education inequality is remarkably low. It's just 2.6%.
Okay.
And the loss in health inequality is also minor. This tells us their schools and hospitals are actually highly egalitarian.
So they are reaching the rural counties, they are serving the working class. That's a huge win.
It is. But then you hit the income inequality.
Here we go.
And this is the flashing warning light. Income inequality causes a massive 14.0% loss to their human development potential.
14%, that is huge.
It is the hidden anchor, the very dimension that is rocketing Ireland to the top of the global rankings. Their economic engine is the exact same dimension where they are failing their own citizens the most.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? Despite being incredibly wealthy on paper, wealth hoarding is the absolute biggest anchor dragging them down.
Yep.
Think about the reality of living in that economy for a second. You have a highly educated population, uniformly healthy, but the wealth distribution is severe. It's basically the Dublin housing crisis personified in a single statistic.
Oh, absolutely.
You have highly credentialed young people who can't afford to buy a home because the wealth generated by the tech sector is heavily concentrated at the top or locked behind corporate gates.
It's highly restricted.
It's like living in a luxury resort where you are allowed to use the world-class gym and the library for free, but the restaurant and the hotel rooms are priced for billionaires, and you're forced to sleep in your car in the parking lot.
That captures the friction perfectly. The foundation is absolutely there, but the access to the ultimate economic rewards is highly restricted.
And to truly understand the mechanics of this restricted access, we have to slice the data across a different demographic line, don't we?
We do. We need to look at how this economy treats men versus women.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this part of the report completely challenged my assumptions. Well, on the surface, Ireland looks like a global champion of gender equality. We are looking at the Gender Development Index, the GDI, which measures the gap between men and women in health, education, and living standards.
Right.
And as a baseline, a score of 1.0 means perfect equality. The global average is 0.955, meaning globally, men generally have higher development scores.
But Ireland's GDI is 1.001.
1.001, which means, mathematically, Irish women actually slightly outperform men on the basic dimensions of human development.
And the underlying data supports it completely. Women in Ireland have a higher life expectancy than men, 84.4 years compared to 80.3 years for men.
Okay, so they outlive them by over 4 years.
Exactly. They also have higher expected years of schooling, so the foundational systems of the state are fundamentally serving women better in these crucial life-building areas.
They outlive and out-educate their male peers. That sounds like a massive structural win for women.
It does, until you cross-reference that with the wealth inequality we just talked about.
Right, and then the illusion just shatters. Because despite that perfect 1.0001 GDI, the income chasm is breathtaking.
It really is.
In 2023, the male GNI per capita was $107,271.
Over 6 figures.
Yeah, but the female GNI per capita, only $74,198.
That is an absolute difference of over $30,000 per person.
Men are making 43% more than women on average. How is that structurally possible? I mean, you have a society where women are living longer, they are staying in the university system longer, they are highly capable by every single foundational metric.
But the second they step out of the classroom and into the corporate economy, they hit a $30,000 brick wall.
Exactly. Make it make sense. How can a society where women go to school longer still suffer from such a severe imbalance in workplace wealth?
Well, it highlights a severe paradox in our modern labor market structures. An educational system can be entirely meritocratic, but the labor market is governed by deeply entrenched cultural and economic biases.
Okay, so what is driving the gap in Ireland specifically?
The report data points us heavily toward occupational segregation.
Occupational segregation, meaning men and women are being funneled into different types of jobs.
Exactly. In a hyper-financialized, tech-driven economy like Ireland's, the highest yielding G&I roles, software engineering, corporate finance, multinational executive positions, those are still heavily male-dominated.
Right.
Meanwhile, the essential foundational roles that actually keep the HDI, high nursing, teaching, care work, those are overwhelmingly female-dominated.
And those roles are systemically undervalued in terms of raw capital output.
Exactly. The market simply does not pay a primary school teacher what it pays a senior data architect for Google, even if both require master's degrees.
Wow. So the women are literally building the health and education stats that give Ireland its top-tier rank, but the men are capturing the economic capital that results from it.
That is exactly what the data implies. And we also have to factor in the invisible penalty of unpaid care work and maternity.
The motherhood penalty.
Right. In many highly developed economies, the divergence in male and female wealth accumulation accelerates sharply in a woman's late 20s and 30s.
Because that's typically when people start having kids.
Exactly. The wealth accumulation track demands uninterrupted, high-hour commitment precisely at the time when care burdens disproportionately fall on women. The system is designed to reward uninterrupted capital generation. It is not designed to reward biological or social reproduction.
Which raises an immediate question for me. If women are dominating the education stats but getting crushed in the salary stats, who is actually writing the labor laws in Dublin to allow this?
That is the right question to ask.
Right. I mean, who has the power to change the rules of the game? Let's look at the Gender Inequality Index in Parliament.
Okay, so the Gender Inequality Index, or GII, measures reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market. A lower score is better here.
And historically, Ireland has aggressively improved on this.
Very aggressively. They dropped from 0.222 in 1990 down to 0.054 in 2023. That ranks them 19th globally.
Top 20 in the world. And the report shows that the driving force behind that rank is their world-class reproductive health data.
It is exceptional.
Maternal mortality is astonishingly low. 5 deaths per 100,000 live births. Compare that to the global average of 216.
It's a fraction of a fraction.
Yeah. And the adolescent birth rate is 4.1 per 1,000, while the world average is nearly 40. So the biological safety nets are, without a doubt, elite.
They are. What's fascinating here is the contradiction when we shift from health to empowerment, because empowerment is a different metric entirely.
Right. Let's look at female representation in Parliament. The lawmakers, the budget setters, the people who actually define corporate tax law and maternity leave policies.
The contrast is stark. In 1990, female parliamentary representation was 13.7%.
Okay, pretty low.
By 2023, it had grown to 27.4%.
27.4%.
Yeah.
Now, to put that in perspective for you, the global average for 2023 is 26.5%. So Ireland, the 11th most developed nation on Earth, whose women out-educate and outlive its men, has a female political representation rate that is barely 1 percentage point above the global average.
Barely above the average. It is the ultimate structural ceiling. It's the difference between providing care and sharing power.
It's honestly like building the most advanced, secure passenger cabin on an airplane. You give the passengers the best medical attention, the best entertainment, top-tier food, but you absolutely refuse to let them into the cockpit to fly the plane.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because when only 27% of your lawmakers are women and your female population earns $30,000 less a year, those two facts are not a coincidence. The men are holding the political capital, which allows them to protect the structures that maintain their economic capital.
It's a sobering realization about the limits of the traditional Human Development Index. A high score guarantees capability. You are healthy and smart, but it does not guarantee equity of power. However, everything we have discussed so far, the tax havens, the housing crisis, the gender pay gap, has been entirely internal.
Yeah, we have only looked inside the borders of Ireland.
Which brings us to the major pivot of this entire deep dive. Because no country exists in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't. That $90,000 GNI doesn't just magically appear on a spreadsheet. It requires immense physical energy. It requires resources. And crucially, it creates waste.
A lot of waste.
So let's talk about that flashing red arrow I mentioned at the beginning, the ecological bill.
This is where the story takes a very heavy turn. In recent years, the United Nations recognized that celebrating these high development scores without accounting for environmental destruction was, well, it was an existential oversight.
Right, because you cannot be a model society if your operational model makes the planet uninhabitable for everyone else.
Exactly. So they introduced the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, the PHDI.
And how exactly does the PHDI work?
It takes that elite HDI score, that 0.949 Nash, and multiplies it by an adjustment factor based on two things: a country's carbon dioxide emissions per capita and its material footprint per capita.
And the penalty for Ireland is absolutely brutal.
It is. They dropped 20 spots, from number 11 down to number 31.
A 20-spot drop in the upper echelons of global development is a massive reevaluation of national success. Let's break down exactly what is causing that crash, starting with the CO2 emissions.
Okay, so Ireland sits at 6.8 tons of CO2 per capita.
And the global average,
4.5 tons.
so they're sitting at over 50% more carbon per person than the global average.
Right. But the truly staggering number in this report is the material footprint.
This is the one that really shocked me. Explain what material footprint means first.
Sure. Material footprint measures the raw materials extracted globally to meet the domestic consumption demands of a country. So we are talking about biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, non-metal minerals, everything it takes to build and fuel your life.
Okay, got it. So in 2023, Ireland's material footprint was 29.4 tons per person.
29.4 tons.
And the global average?
12.7 tons.
Wait, 29.4 versus 12.7. Ireland is consuming 2.3 times the global average.
It is a staggering level of consumption.
I really want to unpack this because when we think of Ireland, we think of rolling green hills, right?
Exactly, the Emerald Isle.
We think of software engineers in clean glass offices in Dublin. We do not think of heavy, dirty industrial extraction. So where are these 29.4 tons of material footprint actually coming from?
That is the illusion of the modern knowledge economy. Just because you don't see the smokestacks outside your window doesn't mean you aren't generating the smoke.
Oh, that's good.
The 15-page report points to a few massive structural drivers here. First, let's look at the tech sector that generates that massive G&I we've been talking about. It relies heavily on data centers.
Right.
Ireland has become the data center capital of Europe for companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And those data centers require colossal amounts of electricity. It puts unprecedented strain on the national grid, which frankly still relies heavily on fossil fuel imports.
So you are burning massive amounts of physical fuel to power the invisible cloud.
Exactly. The clean, weightless digital economy is actually an incredibly heavy, resource-hungry machine.
That makes total sense. What else?
Secondly, you have to look at agriculture. While Ireland's economy is service-dominated in terms of wealth, its physical land is heavily devoted to high-intensity agriculture, specifically beef and dairy exports.
And agriculture is a massive driver of biomass extraction.
Yes, and greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane from the livestock.
Right.
And finally, because Ireland is a wealthy island nation, it imports a staggering amount of consumer goods, vehicles, and construction materials.
Right, because they aren't manufacturing all their own cars or smartphones.
Exactly. The extraction happens in copper mines in South America or factories in Asia, but the footprint technically belongs to the Irish consumer who demands the final product.
Wow. This completely reframes the narrative of their success, doesn't it? Their economic miracle is actively cannibalizing their true development score when the Earth is factored in.
It is.
They are essentially subsidizing their elite 0.949 development score through extreme ecological overdraft.
And it presents a fascinating philosophical and geopolitical debate, because you will often hear the counterargument that Ireland is a small country.
Right, a population of just over 5 million people.
Exactly. So people argue that even with high per capita emissions, their absolute contribution to global climate change is a fraction of a percent compared to giants like the US, China, or India.
But that's a really dangerous rationalization, isn't it?
How so?
Well, if the United Nations is holding Ireland up as the number 11 model for human development, they are implicitly telling developing nations across Africa, Asia, and South America, this is the blueprint. Copy this.
Precisely. That is the core issue. The PHDI isn't making a moral judgment. It is performing a planetary accounting function.
It's just doing the math.
Right. It is stating a mathematical absolute. If every country on Earth successfully copied Ireland's blueprint and consumed 29.4 tons of materials per capita,
The biosphere would collapse.
Instantly. The supply chains would break, the climate would radically destabilize, and the whole concept of human development would become entirely moot because we wouldn't have a habitable environment.
Therefore, a development model that relies on that level of extraction is inherently flawed, regardless of how small a nation is.
Exactly.
So we are looking at a country with multiple, wildly conflicting identities. A shining beacon of health and education, a harbor for massive wealth inequality and gender income gaps, and a glaring warning sign of ecological overreach. How do we synthesize all these different phases to see the complete picture?
The report synthesizes this beautifully in a 5-point radar chart. It overlays all the multidimensional rankings we've discussed to show exactly where the nation leads and where it lags.
Okay, let's build this chart. Imagine this chart in your mind right now.
Okay.
Point 1. The standard HDI. Rank 11. The global elite. Point 2. The inequality-adjusted HDI. Rank 9. Which is even better. Despite the income gaps, their foundational services are so strong that compared to the rest of the world, they actually handle internal inequality quite well.
They really do.
Point 3. The Gender Inequality Index. Rank 19. Top-tier reproductive health keeps them firmly in the top 20.
Point 4. The Gender Development Index, rank 29.
Right, a drop there, largely penalized by that stubborn structural $30,000 gender pay gap in the labor market.
And finally, point 5. Planetary pressures, rank 31.
The glaring, jagged weakness pulling the entire radar chart completely out of shape.
Exactly. And what this radar chart illustrates is a masterclass in internal state management juxtaposed with a failure in external global responsibility.
Wow, that is perfectly stated.
Ireland is incredibly adept at keeping its citizens alive, educated, and relatively secure within its own borders. But its borders are highly porous when it comes to extracting resources and emitting waste into the shared global commons.
It is the classic tragedy of the commons, executed flawlessly by one of the wealthiest nations on Earth.
Yes, it is.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. We've gone through 33 years of data today, from the economic ascent to the ecological crash. So what does this all mean? What are the core takeaways we pull from this deep dive?
I see 3 distinct conclusions here.
Okay, let's hear them.
First is the undeniable reality of extreme development. The baseline of human existence in Ireland, adding nearly 8 years of life expectancy and ensuring 19 years of education, is a triumph. It is a triumph of public policy and targeted investment. They have built an extraordinary engine for human capability.
You cannot take that away from them. But the second takeaway is the hidden cracks. That engine has serious design flaws regarding equity. A $30,000 gender income gap means women are basically building the foundational stats, but are locked out of the ultimate economic rewards.
Right.
And their stalling representation in Parliament shows they are still largely excluded from the control room where the fixes actually need to be made.
Exactly. And the third, and perhaps most urgent takeaway, is transition pressure. That 20-spot drop in the planetary pressure ranking is an alarm bell for the entire developed world.
It really is.
It proves that Ireland's current model is obsolete for the 21st century. They must urgently pivot from a purely growth-driven economy to a green-driven economy. Relying on 29.4 tons of material footprint is a dead end.
It requires a complete paradigm shift. And it brings us right back to the start of our conversation. We thought we were looking at the perfect model student. But when we changed the lens, when we looked at who was hoarding the wealth, and when we looked at the massive ecological cost of the data centers and the supply chains, we saw the fractures.
And it leaves us with a critical, I think, paradigm-shifting thought to consider as we look to the future.
What's that?
Well, for the last century, we have defined progress almost exclusively by extraction and accumulation. But true progress isn't measured by how much capital we can filter through a corporate tax haven or how many server farms we can power.
No, it's not.
True progress must be measured by how many people we can provide a decent, dignified, highly educated life for, without destroying the planet in the process. Because if a country ranked 11th in the world is causing this much environmental damage just to maintain its standard of living.
Is our entire global definition of success fundamentally broken?
That is exactly the question.
And that is the question we all need to answer. Because if the model student is technically cheating on the ecological test, we don't just need to reprimand the student. We might need to rewrite the entire test. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers you see in the headlines. Look for the red arrows hiding behind the green ones. Keep digging, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.